Hello, and welcome to World of Warbirds. I'm Brian Pierce. Operational History. In March 1940, the Anglo-French Purchasing Committee ordered $100 million worth of P-38s, which would work out to a total of 670 aircraft. But they had a few special requests due to the urgent demand that they had for airplanes that had to be delivered like yesterday. Firstly, they didn't want to be dealing with left-hand and right-handed engines. What would happen if they didn't have the correct number of the type they needed? They wanted to be able to shove a new engine in and not worry about whether it was a lefty or a righty. So they ordered theirs with all righties. Secondly, although turbo superchargers were a fantastic invention, the Brits were not familiar with their use. And also, as the supply of turbo supercharger systems was low, the Brits did not want to be waiting for airplanes due to supply chain issues. They just wanted the airplanes, right now, hold the turbos. They were also the ones to name the plane Lightning, which stuck rather than Lockheed's original name of Atalanta, which was a Greek goddess that I've never heard of. Aren't we all glad that they kept the British name? P-38 Atalanta, it just doesn't cut it. Although they provided a great name for the P-38, the British got cold feet, get it? When it came to buying the plane. Again, to simplify things, they were worried about the performance without the turbos, worried about the single-engine characteristics with only right-handed engines, and mostly worried about the, elephant in the room, tail flutter diving into the ground issue. They modified their order and they finally canceled it. This caused some legal contract issues because Lockheed had these British P-38s coming off the line, and who's going to buy them? Turns out the USAAF would buy them all once December 7th, 1941 happened. They were modified as trainers, F-5A photo reconnaissance planes, or sent as fighters to the Pacific, where they were known as P-38Gs. Along with all the other problems plaguing the P-38, there was another one lurking that was purely due to policy. The USAAF did not want long-range fighters. They didn't think that they were needed, and even admitting such would be admitting that the whole bomber will always get through thing was wrong. In fact, airplane manufacturers were discouraged from adding drop tank systems to their fighters, as it was considered by the brass to be an unnecessary waste. But some people thought that long-range fighters could come in pretty handy one day, especially out over the Pacific, where there is a lot of water and not a lot of airfields. And with two thirsty engines, more fuel would be better than less. And one guy came up with a workaround for the P-38. Can you guess who? Yeah, it was Ben Kelsey again. He seized on the observation that the U.S. really needed a high-speed, long-range photo reconnaissance plane. He saw the long-range part of that statement and realized that it was a backdoor to introducing drop tank systems to the P-38. Kelsey put his career on the line in 1941 when he convinced Lockheed to incorporate such subsystems in the photo reconnaissance model, and then, just leave it in for all the other models. Nothing was put in writing, and the whole thing was arranged verbally. So the P-38E had the drop tank plumbing, and when the F and later models came along, they all had it too. The very first Lightning to see active service was one of the previously mentioned photo reconnaissance versions known as an F4 version, which was a P-38E in which all the guns were replaced by 4 cameras. These were being operated by the Royal Australian Air Force in April 1942. In May 1942, 25 P-38 started operations in the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, where the Lightning's long range allowed for long but boring combat patrols. The biggest danger was the weather, but on 9th of August 1942, two P-38Es of the 343rd Fighter Group, 11th Air Force, stumbled upon two Japanese Mavis flying boats and splashed them. These were the first of many Japanese aircraft to be destroyed by lightnings. Operation Bolero was the U.S. mission to transport to the U.K. everything that was needed for the European campaign. That included aircraft. At the time, the way to transport fighters was to either box them up or wrap them up and ship them across the Atlantic, which was slow, and where all the hard work to build them could be wasted if a U-boat put a torpedo into the side of the ship. If only there was a way to avoid airplanes getting torpedoed. In March 1942, someone came up with the thought that U.S. fighters might avoid German U-boats by, flying over them. President Roosevelt made the thing a priority, and General Hap Arnold, maybe because of his relationship with Kelsey and the P-38, was probably aware of the hush-hush drop tank work being done on the P-38. All of a sudden, drop tanks were all the rage, with 300 to 310 U.S. gallon versions being demanded on top of the 150 and 165 U.S. gallon types. On 23rd of June, 1942, two Boeing B-17 Flying Fortresses and 7 P-38s took off from Presque-Isle Army Airfield in Maine. After stopping for fuel in Goose Bay, Newfoundland, Bluey West 1 in Greenland, and Keflavik in Iceland, they arrived in RAAF Heathfield in Scotland. 200 of the P-38s were flown across the Atlantic in July to August 1942, including one flown by our hero, Ben Kelsey himself, who landed in Scotland on the 25th of July. On the 14th of August 1942, Second Lieutenant Elza Shahan of the 27th Fighter Squadron operating out of Iceland spotted and shot down a Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor. This was the first Luftwaffe aircraft destroyed by the USAAF. During the North African campaign, the Lightning's great range was very useful, and lightning struck on the 22nd of November when Lieutenant Mark Shipman downed an unidentified Italian twin-engine aircraft. Later on, he brought down a Messerschmitt Bf-109 and one of those huge Me-323 Gigant transports. If you boil down the whole story of the P-38 combat experience in the Mediterranean, the best that you can come up with is that the results were mixed. The Bf-109s were a tiny bit faster than the P-38, but the twin-engine fighter had a smaller turning radius. The P-38 could outclimb the 109, but the 109 could always dive to get away and the Lightning couldn't follow. Because of all the guns on the nose, though, the Luftwaffe would never attack the P-38 head-on, which was considered suicide. By the time 1943 rolled around, the USAAF had definitely changed its mind about long-range fighter escort, and P-38s were called upon to fly at high altitudes with the bombers. And that brought about all the problems with the cold that I mentioned before. Not only that, but the P-38 was a very demanding plane to fly and fight. As an example, I'm going to read an excerpt from a report by Colonel Harold J. Rao, commander of the 20th Fighter Group, written to his commanding general. As a typical case to demonstrate my point, let us assume that we have a pilot fresh out of flying school with about a total of 25 flying hours in a P-38, starting out on a combat mission. He is on a deep ramrod, penetration, and target support to maximum endurance. He is cruising along with his power set at maximum economy. He is pulling 31 inches of mercury and 2100 RPM. He is auto lean and running on external tanks. His gun heater is off to relieve the load on his generator, which frequently gives out under a sustained heavy load. His sight is off to save burning out the bulb. His combat switch may or not be on. Flying along in this condition, he suddenly gets bounced. What to do flashes through his mind. He must turn. He must increase power and get rid of those external tanks and get on his mains. So he reaches down and he turns two stiff, difficult gas switches, valves, to main, turns on his drop tank switches, presses the release button, puts the mixture to auto-rich, two separate and clumsy operations, and increases his RPM, increases his manifold pressure, turns on his gun heater switch, which he must feel for and cannot possibly see, turns on his combat switch, and he's ready to fight. At this point, he has probably been shot down, or has done one of the several things wrong. Most common error is to push the throttles wide open before increasing RPM. This causes detonation and subsequent engine failure. Or he forgets to switch back to auto-rich, gets excessive cylinder head temperature with subsequent engine failure. In my limited experience with the P-38 group, we have lost at least 4 pilots when bounced, took no immediate evasive action. The logical assumption is that they were so busy in the cockpit trying to get organized that they were shot down before they could get going. End of excerpt. Things got so bad in 1944 that Jimmy Doolittle, then the head of the U.S. 8th Air Force, went to the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough, asking for an honest evaluation of the various American fighters. Test pilot Captain Eric Brown, who we've heard from several times in this podcast, wrote, "We had found out that the BF-109 and FW-190 could fight up to a Mach of 0.75, 3/4 the speed of sound. We checked the Lightning, and it couldn't fly in combat faster than 0.68, so it was useless. We told Doolittle that it was all good for photo reconnaissance and had to be withdrawn from escort duties. And the funny thing is that the Americans had great difficulty understanding this because the Lightning had the 2 top aces in the Far East." Close quotes. One place where the P-38's problems were less evident were in low level. For example, in the role of fighter-bomber during D-Day and after during the Allied advance into Germany. P-38s dive-bombed radar installations, attacked enemy armor and troop concentrations, and provided general air cover. Things got personal in July 1944 when the 370th Group Commander Howard F. Nichols and a squadron of P-38 Lightnings hit Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge's headquarters with Nichols himself skip-bombing a 500-pound bomb right through the front door. Eventually, almost all P-38 units in Europe were converted over to P-51 Mustangs. Well, that's about enough for this episode. In our next one, we will talk about the Pacific, the P-38's playground, plus talk about all the different variants that the P-38 went on to become. So until next time.